Hello and welcome to my latest video on my top 1000 countdown. Now in this video we're going numbers 460 down to 451. So let us go to fighter number 460 now. Okay, that fighter is Bermondsey Billy Wells. Bermondsey Billy Wells beat 4 world champions. He fought 125 rounds against champions, and he beat one Hall of Fame fighter individually, fighting 55 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. And he had a total of 29 fights against rated fighters. Billy Wells scored 25 knockouts, okay, 6 in 3 rounds or less, and 0 in the first round. And he was top 10 rated for a total of 1 year. Now the longest unbeaten run in his career was an unbeaten run of 17 fights, and he was pound for pound rated for 0 years. Billy Wells had 10 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 1 win. He scored 0 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 0 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. His opposition rate comes in at 5 from 18, and his opposition fought rate, 5 from 18, his opposition beat rate 3 from 13. So against champions he had 13 fights, okay, including 5 wins, 8 losses, no draws with 0 KOs. He had 5 fights against Hall of Famers, including 2 wins, 3 losses, no draws with 0 KOs, and he had 0 world title fights. So on to fighter number 459, okay, to one of Japan's great fighters, Hiroyuki Ibihara. Now Ibihara, okay, beat 3 world champions. He fought 98 rounds against champions, and he beat one Hall of Fame fighter individually, fighting 22 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. And Ibihara had 16 fights against rated opponents. Now he scored 33 knockouts in his career, 20 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 6 in the first round, and he was top 10 rated throughout his career for a total of 8 years. His longest unbeaten run was one of 30 fights, and he was never rated in my all-time pound for pound rankings. Now Ibihara did have 6 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 4 wins. He scored 0 wins against top 3 pound for pounders and 0 wins against number 1 pound for pounders, and his opposition fought rate comes in at 2 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 2 from 13. So Ibihara had 9 fights against champions. That includes 4 wins, 5 loss, no draw with 2 knockouts. He has 3 fights against Hall of Famers, including 1 win, 2 loss, no draw with 1 knockout. And he has 6 title fights, including 2 wins, 4 losses, no draws, and 0 title defences. So there is Hiroyuki Ibihara. When we go to fight number 458, it is former heavyweight contender who actually had a very tough career, Jack Reno. A bit high for me personally, but it is what it is. They're all rated the same. So Jack Reno beat 1 world champion. He fought 103 rounds against champions, and he beat 1 Hall of Fame fighter, fighting 119 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Jack Reno had 23 fights against rated fighters, and he scored a total of 37 knockouts, okay, 17 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 4 in the first round. Jack Reno was top 10 rated for a total of 3 years, and the longest unbeaten run in his career was an unbeaten run of 19 fights. He was never pound for pound rated in my all-time rankings, and Jack Reno had 8 fights against pound for pound fighters, but scored no wins in the 3 pound for pound categories, and his opposition fought rate comes in at 5 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 3 from 13. So Reno had 10 fights against champions, including 2 wins, 8 loss, no draw with 1 knockout. He had 12 fights against Hall of Famers, including 2 wins, 10 losses, no draws with 1 knockout, and had 0 world title fights. So on to our next fighter, okay, it is more modern middleweight champion, long-term middleweight champion, Arthur Abraham, also of course fought super middle. Arthur Abraham, okay, beat 5 world champions. He fought 115 rounds against champions, and he beat no Hall of Fame fighters. He did fight 24 rounds against Hall of Famers in his career. And Arthur Abraham had a total of 19 fights against rated fighters. He scored 30 knockouts, okay, 12 in 3 rounds or less, and 0 in the first round. Now Abraham was top 10 rated for 12 years. His longest unbeaten run was one of 31 fights, and he was pound for pound rated for 1 year. Now Arthur Abraham had 3 fights against pound for pound fighters and scored 1 win in each of the 3 pound for pound categories, and his opposition fought rate comes in at 2 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 2 from 13. So Abraham had 11 fights against champions. That included 7 wins, 4 losses, no draws with 4 knockouts. He has 2 fights against Hall of Famers, both of which are defeats. And he had a massive title fight record, Arthur Abraham, having 22 world title fights in total, scoring 19 wins, 3 losses with 16 title defences. And my pen went flying there like a giant wave had swept him from the east. So anyway, on to fighter number 456, okay, is Bruno Akari. Now, Bruno Akari beat 2 world champions, okay, he fought 35 rounds against champions. Yeah, good evening, Martin, hope you're well, buddy. He beat 1 Hall of Fame fighter and fought 10 rounds against Hall of Fame opponents. Now, Bruno Akari had 17 fights against rated fighters, okay, and he scored a total of 38 knockouts, 8 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 2 knockouts in the first round. Now, Bruno Akari was top 10 rated for 8 years, and he had a longest unbeaten run that ran to 61 fights. His pound for pound ratings, okay, was 3 years he was rated, which isn't bad, and he had 1 fight against pound for pounders and also scored 1 win in all 3 pound for pound categories. Bruno Akari's opposition fought rate comes in at 3 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 2 from 13. So Bruno Akari, okay, had 3 fights against champions, including 2 wins, no loss, 1 draw with 1 knockout. He had 1 fight against a Hall of Famer that was a win with 0 knockouts. And Bruno Akari had an unbeaten title fight run, okay, of 10 world title fights with 10 title fight wins, whilst making 9 title defences. So on to fighter 455, okay, it is Black Bill, he was known as, but we're talking about Cuban fighter Eladio Valdez, the flyweight fighter, who has a very, very tough career as well, mixed in good company. Eladio Valdez, I say that sometimes and people wonder why. It's because many fighters don't get recognised for the resumes, okay, and a fighter like Eladio Valdez never gets recognised at all anyway. But, you know, ultimately, you know, a lot of fighters deserve a lot of credit for the resumes. Eladio Valdez beat 2 world champions, okay, fought 89 rounds against champions, and he beat no Hall of Fame fighters, but fought 15 rounds against a Hall of Famer in his career. And Eladio Valdez comes in with a total of 38 fights against rated opponents. He scored 20 knockouts in his career, 6 of them in 3 rounds or less, and 3 in the first round. And Eladio Valdez was top 10 rated for 3 years. Now, his longest unbeaten run was a run of 32 fights, and Eladio Valdez was pound for pound rated for 0 years. Now, he did have 2 fights against pound for pound fighters, but scored no wins in the 3 pound for pound categories, and his opposition fought rate comes in at 5 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 3 from 13. So against world champions, Valdez had 9 fights, okay, including 6 wins, 3 losses, no draws with 0 knockouts. He had 1 fight against a Hall of Famer, that was a defeat, and he had 1 world title fight that also was a defeat. So Eladio Valdez is 454 when we got 455. Sorry, when we got to fight at 454, it is Al Singer. Was Al Singer in my last countdown, or is he new to this one? Yeah, a number of people are new, a number of people throughout the top 1,000 have been added, and next year a lot more are going to be added. So next top 1,000 are doing a few years' time. The big top 1,000 might be 3 years' time, who knows. You know, there's going to be even more fighters in it. So Al Singer beat 5 world champions, okay, he fought 57 rounds against champions, and he beat 2 Hall of Fame fighters. Al Singer also fought 43 rounds against Hall of Famers, and he had a total of 22 fights against rated fighters. He scored 26 knockouts in his career, 15 of them in 3 rounds or less, and 3 in the first round. Now, Al Singer was top 10 rated for a total of 2 years, and the longest unbeaten run in his career was an unbeaten run of 27 fights. He was never pound for pound rated in my all-time rankings, Al Singer. He did have 8 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 3 wins. He scored 1 win against pound for pound top 3 fighter, but 0 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And his opposition fought rate comes in at 3 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 2 from 13. Al Singer, okay, had 11 fights against champions, including 6 wins, 4 loss, 1 draw, with 3 knockouts. He had 8 fights against Hall of Famers, with a record of 3 wins, 4 loss, 1 draw, with 1 knockout. And he had 2 world title fights, including 1 win, 1 loss, with 0 title defences. So Al Singer 454. When we go to 453, is a murderous punching featherweight. Okay, Danny Lopez was a brutal puncher. Now, Danny Lopez beat 4 world champions, okay, fought 70 rounds against champions, and he beat 1 Hall of Fame fighter individually, fighting 43 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. And Danny Lopez had a total of 21 fights against rated fighters. Now, he scored 39 knockouts in his career, 20 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 7 in the first round. And Danny Lopez was top 10 rated for a total of 7 years. His longest unbeaten run ran to 23 fights, and he was pound for pound rated in my all-time rankings for a total of 3 years. Now, Danny Lopez had 4 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 2 wins. He scored 1 win against pound for pound top 3 fighter and 0 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Danny Lopez's opposition fought rate comes in at 2 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 1 from 13. So Danny Lopez had 8 fights against champions, okay, that includes 5 wins, 3 losses, no draws, with 4 knockouts. He has 4 fights against Hall of Famers, including 1 win, 3 losses, no draw, with 1 knockout. And he has 11 world title fights, that includes 9 wins, 2 losses, no draws. And Danny Lopez made 8 title defences. So on to our next fighter, 452. Okay, it's a fighter called Johnny Gonsalves, another name who most people will not be familiar with. Johnny Gonsalves, okay, beat 3 world champions. He fought 98 rounds against champions, and he beat no Hall of Fame fighters. Also fought 30 rounds against Hall of Famers. And Johnny Gonsalves had a total of 47, nearly half century of fights against rated opponents. He scored 8 knockouts in his career, 1 of them in 3 round or less, 1 in the first round, and he was top 10 rated for a total of 8 years. Now, Johnny Gonsalves' longest unbeaten run was 1 of 14 fights, and he was pound for pound rated in my all-time rankings for 1 year. Now, he had 13 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 3 wins. He scored 0 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 0 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And his opposition fought rate comes in at 4 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 2 from 13. So Gonsalves, in fights against champions, has a total of 10 fights, okay, including 4 wins, 5 losses, 1 draw, with 0 knockouts. He has 3 fights against Hall of Famers, all of which are defeats, and Johnny Gonsalves has 0 world title fights. So onward to our final fighter, fighter number 451, who I believe is a new entry this year. Some of them I remember, but I've been adding so many fighters and tinkering with so many fighters files, sometimes I forget. I should have, sometimes forget, but every year fighters get added, but this year a whole number of fighters have been added. So George Courtney, okay, beat 1 world champion. Some of them are more obvious to me and I remember them, but I've added so many, sometimes I'm a bit wishy-washy. He fought 15 rounds against champions, okay, he beat 0 Hall of Famers and fought 16 rounds against Hall of Fame fighters. George Courtney had 27 fights against rated fighters, and he scored a total of 44 knockouts, 20 of them in 3 rounds or less, and 6 in the first round. Now, Courtney was top 10 rated for a total of 6 years, and the longest unbeaten run in his career was an unbeaten run of 12 fights. Now, Courtney was never pound for pound rated in my all-time rankings. He had 7 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 2 wins. He scored 0 wins against top 3 pound for pounders and 0 wins against number 1 pound for pounders. And his opposition fought rate comes in at 4 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 3 from 13. The wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and pound for pound number 1 fighters often are not big numbers, but what you will see as we go forward in the countdown, especially in the top 200, but even after that, some fighters score some rather silly numbers in there in terms of pound for pound fights, wins, pound for pound number 1s. Yeah, some of those numbers do go a bit crazy, as do the numbers against rated opponents and pretty much every other number as well, come to think about it. But yeah, it's just one of those things. So his opposition fought rate, okay, is 4 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 3 from 13. So Courtney, okay, had 3 fights against champions, including 1 win, 2 loss, no draw, with 1 knockout. He had 2 fights against Hall of Famers, both of which are defeats, and another fighter, okay, who never got a world title shot. So some people have told me before the colour line is what stopped most people getting the title shots, and yes, for the most part, most of those guys were denied title shots. Of course, Walcott got one and got a title. Gans got one, got a title. Johnson did. Langford challenged for a welterweight title, albeit against a black fighter. But there's also many fighters across all colours and creeds who didn't get title shots. Now, the difference with colour line is there was a clear racial division. Okay, they had that physical bar, and only in certain states were the states a bit more lukewarm to colour line and would allow black fighters to fight for titles. I always remembered when Jack Johnson and Joe Jeanette were going to have a fight in New York. They wouldn't allow it. They said, no, we will not allow 2 black fighters to fight for a world title in New York. Now, in end, Johnson ended up fighting Al Palza. But you know what I mean. And Jeanette ripped him in media, calling him a yellow belly, saying he's going to fight Al Palza, he's a novice. Blah, blah, blah. But yeah, the colour line was a set thing. Those fighters were restricted. But also a lot of non-black fighters also didn't get title shots. Part of the problem is either A, they were dangerous, B, like with Corbett and certain other fighters, they just generally didn't defend the titles very much. Some of them could go a year without defending the title. So that also, it could be because you were too good, or the champion wasn't very active in defending his title, whereas fighters like Gans were more active with title defences. Some of the champions were very inactive, going over a year without making a defence, just literally waiting while a major contender came up. So it depended on the champion how active they were defending titles, but all these things contributed in a way. So, big shout out to Random in the chat. Good to see you, buddy. Good to see you. I hope you're well. So, yeah, there's my latest video. We've gone already from 8 to 500. We're already now 450 to go. Okay, so basically, we're in the final stretch. We're in the second half stretch. Videos will continue until playlist is finished. I will then be happy because doing the top 1,000 videos and getting them ready while I'm working on other things does take up a lot of my time. I will be more relaxed when the top 1,000 is finished because it will be up on my channel, and then I can relax and focus on the career videos and any of the sidebar stuff I do. But I will be more relaxed. I'll have more time. Because the career videos, getting them ready and doing them, very simple process. So I'll have more time for other sidebar things like carrying on with career files that I've suspended while I'm doing this, and also doing other things. I've realised with the graph videos, like what I've done at heavyweight, cruiserweight, I'm now working through light heavyweights, super middleweights are ready to do. I'm working on middleweights. I've realised that many people have commented, and quite rightly, the good comments to leave. It's an accurate finding when you watch them, is that some fighters don't score as well as they think, and part of that reason is because I'm going decade by decade. Okay, so some fighters will fight, say, 5 years in the 1950s and only fight 3 years in the 1960s. So in both decades, they're not getting more than half a decade in each decade. So what I'm debating on doing is, as well as continuing the graph videos per decade, like with the divisions I've finished, heavy, cruiser, light heavy and onward, when I finish that, I'm thinking of doing an all-time ring points. So starting 1924, going to 2019, so that fighters who do fight across decades, you see their true totals and see how all the top names in each division match against each other. And I think that as a final, I'll probably wait while the 17 playlists are done. Then I'll do those big ones. I'll do the heavyweight one, 1924 to 2019, and put that on the heavyweight playlist. So the playlist will feature the decades, but then at the end you've got the all-time ring point video where all the fighters will be matched against each other. Holmes and Ali against Lewis, and etc., etc. So I'm thinking I'll do that once the 17 divisions are done as a capstone to each playlist. So people then, like with Bob Foster, like Martin pointed out, and John Conte pipping him. Conte was longer rated over that decade, and he was rated highly a lot of times, so Foster only had a partial decade. So it'll counter that, and you'll get Foster's full total, Archibald's full total, Joe Louis's full total. Joe Louis did great in 40s, didn't do that great in 30s, but Joe Louis going all time, matched against all the other heavyweights across eras in one big list. I think that'll be fun, and a fun capstone for each of divisions. So you can see who scored the most points per decade, but then you'll see historically across the whole division ratings which fighters have done best. So I'm thinking that's a good plan. So anyway, big shout out to guys in chat, Martin and Random. Always great to see you fellas. And I'll be back tomorrow with another video. So I'm the Boxing Librarian, and I'm out for now.